Dear Latter-day Saint intellectuals, you're probably going to think this letter does not apply to you. You're likely convinced that your interpretation of the scriptures, the words of the prophet, and the gospel in general is 100% right. You probably think that your ideas are poetry itself, but Satan wishes to have you, and he wants you because of your ability to use ideas to influence others, just like Korihor, Nehor, and Sherem. I want to explain how Satan will try to make this happen. Yes, of course he'll try to use pride. It's his favorite tool. It was the downfall of the Nephites after all. But pride is as varied as people. It can be haughty and lofty. It can have the appearance of piety and humility. It can manifest itself in victimhood as well as oppression. But intellectuals, well, we're born with a defect. We're attracted to ideas. We crave the pursuit of truth and an understanding of how truths fit together. And this proclivity comes with its own special form of pride. I call it Gnostic pride. And I'm going to explain how it's used against you, but first, some quick background. Gnosis is the Greek word for knowledge, but in the context of Gnostic pride, it's helpful to think of it as secret, hidden knowledge. Gnosticism is the thing that usually comes to mind with Gnosis. Gnosticism was a mystic ideology that arose alongside the early church after the death of Jesus and his apostles. Gnostic ideas often have a kernel of truth. Often they're half-truths, sometimes they're simply a prioritization of one truth over others. But other times they're actually an anti-truth, or in other words, a lie with evil intent. I'll speak to this last one later in the examples. Even if they have a kernel of truth, Gnostic ideas are still in opposition to the complete truth. Because of this, they require mental gymnastics like cognitive dissonance to put the other conflicting truths to rest. Gnosis often manifests as a critique. It's easier to tear something down than build something amazing, and in tearing something down, you're able to become self-important. It's a form of moral posturing because by showing people the quote-unquote truth, you look like a hero or a prophet. But Gnosis always presents itself to the intellectual as a hidden piece of knowledge that is either relatively or completely unknown. Here's how Gnosis typically works. So there's a well-known truth that a population understands and accepts as evident and universal. Then someone is quote-unquote inspired to see the hidden or secret truth. This Gnostic knowledge is desirable for one or more of the following reasons. A, few know about it, sometimes the intellectual discovers it. B, it challenges the universal truth or blatantly counters it. C, it's often accusatory or critical. Think of Satan being the great accuser. And lastly, it often confirms a specific cognitive bias of the discoverer. Then the idea gains a small faction of followers, and then finally that group peels off from the main group and creates division. I call these groups that peel off Gnostic Cabals. A Gnostic Cabal is a group of people that have accepted a Gnostic idea as the truth. And Gnostic Cabals are parasitic on religion because they utilize the religious impulse in people. Just like Gnosticism and early Christianity, they also often start from within religious structures. Someone might take one idea from the religion and then expand on it. A quick aside about my use of the term Cabal. The concept is similar to the word cult, and many cults are actually built on Gnostic ideas. But the term cult is loaded and carries too much baggage. In contrast, the word Cabal is itself a reference to Gnostic ideas. The term traces back to Kabbalah, the medieval Latin name for the Kabbalah, a traditional system of esoteric Jewish mysticism. Latin borrowed Kabbalah from the Hebrew word which means received or traditional lore. And if you look at the teachings of the Kabbalah, it seems to be a Gnostic splinter from mainstream Judaism, which seemed pretty serendipitous to me, but I digress. So, switching gears, in his classic talk on pride, President Ezra Taft Benson explained that the root cause of all pride is enmity. He explained it this way. The central feature of pride is enmity. Enmity toward God and enmity toward our fellow men. Enmity means hatred toward, hostility to, or a state of opposition. It is the power by which Satan wishes to reign over us. Gnostic ideas and the cabals that form around them are actually tailor-made for division. They're designed by the adversary as enmity machines. This is one of the very clear ways that you can tell a Gnostic cabal from pure religion. Pure religion means treating everyone as a child of God, including and especially those we disagree with. In my opinion, Love your enemies is still, in the 21st century, maybe the most revolutionary idea ever. I'm now going to provide a few examples of Gnostic Cabals along with the core Gnostic idea of each one to help illustrate this concept. But before I do that, I want to add a quick disclaimer. Whether you're politically blue, red, or purple, you're likely going to spend a part of your time trying to dissect my motives as I walk through these examples. Please don't waste your energy on that. My goal isn't to push a political agenda, it's to help bring people to Christ. Years ago, as a newly married couple, my wife and I listened to my intellectual father spout a popular Gnostic diatribe about how the world is overpopulated and how we're going to run out of resources. It made him seem smart and special. I'm sure he felt that way at the time. It was only later when I got older that I learned that this particular piece of Gnostic information was a bald-faced lie, and that it was shared widely by a biologist named Paul Ehrlich in his book The Population Bomb. And by the way, in opposition to actual data and facts, and of course a direct threat to the Lord's doctrine of the family. Here's how Paul Ehrlich's example uses the Gnostic device. We've been told for a long time in Western countries that family is the most important unit of society. We also know that we're supposed to actually take care of the earth, be stewards of it. Paul Ehrlich's Gnostic idea is that actually what we thought all along was wrong. There are too many people and we're hurting the planet. It was a doomsday prediction that made him look smart. In fact, he used his platform to make bold predictions like this one. On the first Earth Day in 1970, he warned that, quote, in 10 years, all important animal life in the sea will be extinct. Large areas of the coastline will have to be evacuated because of the stench of dead fish. Now, of course, the only thing that stank was the gnosis. His ideas led directly to enmity because once a person gained the gnosis that the world is overpopulated, they feel a sense of mission and entitlement to correct the bad intentions of those who want children. This is exactly what happened in my case with my father. Now, Gnosticism itself was a Gnostic cabal. The Gnostics believed that Christianity and other religions of the time were hiding the real truth. The Gnostics believed that the God of this world had trapped us here against our will, and that the only way to escape and be quote-unquote saved was by understanding this important truth. Or in other words, by obtaining the gnosis, or the secret knowledge. Furthermore, they believed that the God of these religions were blinding men from the fact that there was an even higher God above them. Now, I'm not going to go into it in this essay, but when you look at the Gnostic gospel through the lens of the restored gospel, it's pretty clear that the true God of the Gnostics is actually Lucifer, but I digress. Marxism began as an economic cabal. The cry behind it was one that sounded altruistic. The workers should own the means of production. But behind it was a Gnostic idea. Every interaction between humans should be seen through the lens of power dynamics, specifically oppressed and oppressor. Even with the fall of the communist countries in the 20th century, Marxism persisted. Now, this same powerful Gnostic cabal appears as identity Marxism. Marxism is the ultimate Gnostic cabal because it's like a hydra. Even if you cut off one head, it quickly grows another one. Modern identity Marxism is especially sticky to those who are high in compassion, because they rightly feel compassion for those who struggle. And this is why it's such a powerful and insidious tool of Satan. Many of the Gnostic ideas behind identity Marxism are actually anti-truths. Bald-faced lies like only white people can be racist are made possible by the marriage between the gnosis of victim and oppressor and the manipulation of compassionate people. Now, there is a kernel of truth behind Marxism. Many marginalized people have been the victims of those in power, but it fails as a unifying theory because it uses the narrative of victim and oppressor to explain literally every inequality in history. A simple explanation like this for things that are endlessly complex is compelling but lacks any nuance. While there are absolutely real conspiracies out there, of course the Book of Mormon talks about them, many conspiracies are simply Gnostic cabals. In my opinion, QAnon is a recent example of these, and I believe it was partially responsible for the events on January 6th. It engendered strong feelings of tribal enmity among those who fell under its spell. QAnon was driven by a Gnostic idea that the deep state had taken over our government and that there was an individual or group of individuals within the government who were aware and separate from the deep state, and that they would save our republic from corruption. Many adherents to this cabal believed that Trump was one of these saviors. Like the other Gnostic Cabals in these examples, there is some truth to this Gnostic idea as well. As Latter-day Saints, we know that our government will be taken over by secret combinations, and there's decent evidence that this has already happened. But we should be putting our trust in Jesus Christ, not in a politician or other flawed humans. I know many friends and family who fell under the spell of this Gnostic Cabal. Very recently, there's a new popular Gnostic Cabal of polygamy deniers. These members of the church claim to know the real truth, that Joseph Smith never actually practiced polygamy, and that it was later church leaders who practiced it only out of sexual gratification and power, and then these leaders rewrote history to make it seem like Joseph had practiced it as well. And I get it, polygamy is a really difficult idea to accept. I know many members and former members who really struggle with it. But they should be aware that intellectuals who are pushing this particular gnosis are denying the facts and are making conclusions that are driving them and their followers to apostasy. This cabal has taken the idea so far that anti-polygamists now actively align themselves with critics of the church, and they speak out against other things they aren't comfortable with, things like temples, garments, temple interviews, etc. They use the excuse that anything Brigham Young pushed for was suspect. And worst of all, in my opinion, this cabal preys on those who struggle with the idea of polygamy, and it uses this cognitive bias against them. Speaking of church critics, many ex-Mormon activists could also be considered a Gnostic cabal. They are seduced by the Gnostic idea that the church has been intentionally hiding the real truth in history from members. Like all other Gnostic cabals, this one appeals to black and white thinking because instead of being able to simply cease believing in the truth claims of the church, these post members must believe that everything about the church is evil and misleading and that there was never anything redeeming about it. Now, I want to be clear that not all former members of the church are part of this cabal. I know many former members who have left and are still able to acknowledge the positive fruits of the church. So, just like these few examples, there are thousands of Gnostic ideas, and they all lead intellectuals away from real truth and light. Now, fortunately, there's a pattern to Gnostic pride that we can see from these examples, and in my observation, there are 4 stages to the pattern that can lead to apostasy: discovery, testing, purification, and recruiting. They don't have to happen in exactly this order, but they all happen. Let me quickly explain each one. Step 1, discovery. Discovery can take many forms, but it often happens as we focus on intellectual hobbies over personal worship. In some rare cases, individuals have supernatural visits that they think are from God. Korihor is an example of this. He admitted that he had been duped by an angel of light who basically handed him his gnosis. Many leaders of modern fundamentalist cults are often examples of this. But the result is the same. An intellectual discovers a piece of knowledge or insight that often challenges or overturns common knowledge. As intellectuals, almost nothing is more delectable than secret special knowledge. Knowledge that no one else knows. This plays on our cognitive bias. And it hides flaws in the idea that we may have otherwise seen. But here's something to remember. The Lord works line upon line, precept upon precept. And that brings us to step 2, testing. This phase involves shopping your newfound gnosis around. You might tell your spouse or other close family. You casually drop it into dinner conversations. You comment in social media posts. You find ways of working a lightweight version of it into Sunday school. On the outside, it may look like you're trying to vet the idea, but that's not actually how cognitive bias works. If you've ever read Jonathan Haidt's research, you know that humans don't logically suss out ideas. We decide about the truth of something using our intuition and then logically construct arguments to support that supposition. Step 3, purification. This stage is the process of eliminating any and all challenges to your newfound gnosis. If a piece of truth is a threat to your secret knowledge, you figure out the best argument that puts that threat to rest. And you do this over and over, purifying your Gnostic idea and doing your best to suppress any and all cognitive dissonance that arises from this process. Step 4, recruiting. So finally, once you've convinced yourself that your gnosis is absolute truth, the thing that you want most is to convince others. So you look for recruits and you argue with those who challenge you. You often use ad hominem attacks in your arguments. You have to do this because your cognitive dissonance demands that you treat someone who disagrees with you as evil. And the more people you can recruit into your Gnostic cabal, the more you can convince yourself of the lie. All pride is destructive, but Gnostic pride? Well, that was designed especially for you, dear Latter-day Saint intellectual. So how do you guard against it? We're encouraged to seek further light and knowledge, but Satan and his Gnostic seduction often hide in the search for further knowledge. So seeking further light and knowledge has to be paired with personal worship. And we all know what that is. It's the standard Sunday school answer. You study the scriptures and you pray every day. You show constant gratitude and dependence on God. You attend the temple regularly, and you serve. So how do you know if you've been seduced by a Gnostic idea? Well, personal worship is often neglected. It often overturns well-known truths. It's often paired with accusation. It offends the spirit. And your mind is closed to the idea that you might be wrong. And of course, it has a very specific fruit: enmity. It drives enmity that separates families, ruins lives, and makes people miserable. And it prioritizes truth over people. Like I mentioned before, pure religion demands that we treat everyone as a child of God, including our enemies. So pursue the truth. Seek out further light and knowledge, but do so with even more diligence in your personal worship. One should increase in equal measure with the other. Fill your life and your mind with activities that bring light. Instead of being seduced by Gnostic lies, you will be filled with the Spirit, and you will receive more actual truth than you thought was possible. Sincerely, your friend.